You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. The bright spring sun blinded Sarah as soon as she stepped outside. Shielding her eyes with her hand, she looked around, and a familiar smile touched her lips. What beauty surrounded her! Apple trees stood in lush bloom, covered in delicate pink buds, and the emerald grass of the lawns delighted the eye with its vibrant green. Above, a boundless blue sky stretched out, across which fluffy white clouds drifted lazily. On the sun-drenched playground, a little girl soared on a swing like a butterfly. A light white sundress fluttered around her slender legs, and her long chestnut hair sometimes flew upwards, sometimes fell downwards. The girl was enchanting, as if she had stepped out of the pages of a fairy tale. "So here you are," Sarah said tenderly, heading towards the swings. A smile didn't leave her face at the sight of the little one. Noticing the approaching woman, the girl laughed heartily and stopped swinging. The swing slowed its flight, gradually coming to a halt. The little one looked directly at Sarah, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Is it breakfast time already?" the girl asked brightly, her voice full of anticipation. Sarah nodded, and once again her heart ached at the thought. This little one could have had a completely different childhood, dark and full of fear. The girl, who is now only 3 years old, doesn't even suspect the trouble that lay in wait for her very recently. Perhaps when Annie is older, her parents will tell her the whole truth. But now she simply enjoys every day, basking in the love and care of her loved ones. She is surrounded by a happy childhood, the affection of her mom and dad, the beauty of this world. And Sarah is always nearby, her quiet guardian angel. That's exactly what Annie's parents think, confident that Sarah played a huge role in their daughter's fate. Sarah never considered herself a beauty, neither in childhood nor later. In her youth, she suffered greatly because of her appearance. For hours, she would look in the mirror at her unremarkable face with a shapeless nose and small gray eyes. Short eyelashes, thin lips, and full cheeks completed the picture. She wasn't ugly, but it was difficult to call her sweet or pretty. Her figure was also quite ordinary, not tall, with full hips and almost a complete lack of waist. Nature seemed to have been stingy with bright colors for Sarah, leaving her with medium brown hair, pale eyelashes, and pale skin. Even cosmetics couldn't make her appearance more noticeable. Her friend Brenda was a different story altogether, a big-eyed beauty with a thick braid down to her waist, or her classmate Victoria, tall, slender, and striking. Boys flocked around them. They were always the center of attention. It seemed all doors were open to them, unlike Sarah, who felt invisible. Sarah didn't shine in class either. Her academic abilities were quite mediocre. Of course, she studied better than Brenda, but Brenda didn't need to try to be everyone's favorite with those big eyes and dazzling smile. But Sarah, she seemed like a gray mediocrity to herself, and it greatly upset her. Her parents didn't understand or share their daughter's worries. "Healthy, arms and legs intact," her mother listed, looking at the despondent Sarah. "Eyes see, ears hear. Look how many disabled people there are around, people with real defects, and don't anger God." "And anyway, calm down," her father added. "You can't drink water from a face, you know. Getting a C in algebra, that's bad. Worry about that instead." Her parents, old-fashioned people, considered appearance foolish and advised Sarah to think more about her studies. The girl tried, of course, deciding that since she wasn't lucky with her looks, she would become an outstanding specialist. But no matter how Sarah pored over textbooks or sat over notebooks, nothing worked out. Formulas remained an incomprehensible script, dates got mixed up, and Russian language rules seemed like a set of complex words. And Sarah didn't have any special talents. Some sang, some played instruments, some excelled in sports. But nothing she did turned out better than others. In childhood, she joined various clubs, trying to find her calling, but she never found it. In her teenage years, Sarah seriously cried over her dullness and mediocrity. She tried so hard, but nothing worked out, and her parents didn't support her, sometimes even scolding her for being gloomy. "Not everyone can be beautiful and talented," her mother said angrily. "Well, what can you do if that's how it turned out? At least you're healthy and strong. That's the main thing. The country relies on people like you, not on those big-eyed dragonflies." These words made Sarah feel even worse, because more than anything in the world, she wanted to be exactly like that, a big-eyed dragonfly. Boys didn't pay attention to her, and Sarah considered it natural. Why would they? Not bright like Brenda or Victoria, not smart like the excellent student Catherine, whom everyone respected. It was especially hard to see Alex, a classmate whose sight made Sarah's heart pound wildly, gazing at others and not noticing her at all. Sometimes he even forgot to say hello, walking past her as if she were empty space. Sarah was angry at fate and her parents for her unremarkable genes, dreamed of plastic surgery, but more often just sighed, looking at her beautiful classmates. The only thing the girl liked from about the age of 10 was interacting with small children. Sweet, funny, trusting little ones always cheered Sarah up. It was so easy to surprise and delight them. They didn't pay attention to her appearance or school achievements. Children felt that they were welcome and responded with happy smiles and sincere love. Moms in the yard were always happy when Sarah came out of the entrance, as the little ones immediately rushed to meet her. She knew how to organize fun games for them, knew how to please them. For these boys and girls, Sarah became the center of their universe for a long time. The little ones even cried when their parents tried to take them home in the middle of a game. "You have a talent," one young mother said once. "Not everyone knows how to approach small children." She had a very capricious son, but next to Sarah, he was transformed, becoming smart and compliant. Talent? Sarah thought she had misheard. Could she, so mediocre, have a talent? What's so special about messing around with toddlers? Anyone can do that. It doesn't take much brains. "Perhaps you could become a good teacher," the boy's mother said thoughtfully, as he clung trustingly to Sarah's hand. That was when the girl first thought about choosing a profession. Well, maybe it's true. Become a teacher? She really enjoyed interacting with small children, and most importantly, she was good at it. Sarah was already about 14, and graduating from middle school was not far off. It was high time to think about a specialty. Especially since the girl definitely wasn't going to the 10th grade, as she realized that studying wasn't for her. Her parents supported their daughter's choice to go to college after 9th grade. "Right," her father praised. "No need to waste time at school. You'll have a profession in your hands. You won't get lost in this life." "We're not particularly capable of sciences," her mother sighed. "You can't jump above your head, apparently. None of us have a higher education, and it seems you won't either." Sarah knew that her mother had hoped for a different outcome, wanted her daughter to make something of herself, to become a boss. But Sarah's school performance brought her ambitious parent back down to earth. The woman was disappointed by this turn of events and didn't hide it, which caused her daughter pain. Upon learning that Sarah wanted to become a teacher, her mother and father expressed their dissatisfaction. "What kind of profession is that?" her father indignantly asked. "Wiping other people's children's noses for pennies. Nonsense." "Agreed," her mother nodded. "Salaries are meager. Responsibility is huge. Parents of children, you know what they can be like. They'll make your life hell." So Sarah went to study to become a seamstress operator, because this profession, according to her mom and dad, was supposed to bring their daughter happiness. Always with money, always needed by people. Her mother ticked off on her fingers. "You can take on extra work, and you'll sew for your own family yourself. Just imagine the savings." Studying was difficult for Sarah. Most of her classmates' work practically flew out of their hands, but hers invariably resulted in crooked seams and skewed patterns. Later, of course, she learned through perseverance, but remained at a mediocre level. But her parents were satisfied and calm. Sarah no longer fussed with toddlers. She had grown up, and studying took up a lot of time. But if she happened to interact with the small children of acquaintances, she would truly blossom. "Oh, we'll have many grandchildren, father." Her mother smiled, seeing her daughter's interest. "Well, I'm not against it," her father nodded, "as long as we get a decent son-in-law who can provide for the whole brood." But her parents' dreams didn't come true. Sarah dreamed of having her own children from a young age, couldn't imagine life without the ringing laughter and the patter of little feet. But somehow it didn't work out. Crowds of admirers never flocked around Sarah, and she realized this quite early. However, the time came, and young men began to pay attention to her. Of course, they weren't handsome leaders like her former classmate Alex, but the girl was still happy. It turned out to be so pleasant to feel that a guy was interested in you. This guy was Mark, who lived in the neighboring yard. Sarah had known him since childhood. He was just as gray and unremarkable, not a hooligan, but not an excellent student either. He had studied at a construction college, got a job at a factory, and inherited a small studio apartment. Under pressure from relatives, Mark decided it was time to get married and start a family. His gaze fell on Sarah, a girl from a decent family, modest, hard-working, domestic, without special pretensions. Maybe he dreamed of bright stars like Brenda or Victoria, but he realistically assessed his chances. With spoiled beauties, he would have to measure up, work hard, constantly improve himself. But with Sarah, a calm, quiet life awaited him. One day, Mark met Sarah at the bus stop when she was returning from the sewing factory. "Hi," he smiled, so easily, as if they were close friends. A surprised Sarah greeted him back. Mark said he had specifically waited for her for half an hour. This news made the girl's heart pound. Could it be that for the first time a guy had paid attention to her and even done something for her? Of course, she allowed him to walk her home. Mark walked beside her, talking about his life, asking Sarah questions, and then he took her hand. This gentle gesture told the girl a lot. He walked her to the entrance and, a little shyly, said, "Are you free tomorrow? There's a new movie with Jim Carrey at the cinema. Maybe we could go together?" "I love that actor," Sarah smiled widely. "Of course we'll go." That evening the girl couldn't fall asleep for a long time, remembering her walk with Mark. He looked at her like no one had before, interested, attentive. It even seemed with admiration, as if he didn't notice her dullness but saw someone else. It was incredibly pleasant. Sarah finally felt pretty, attractive, worthy of love and interest, almost like Brenda. Mark himself had never aroused romantic feelings in Sarah. She hadn't even paid attention to him. But today he appeared in a different light. It turned out he could be decisive and gentle at the same time. There was a sense of strength and reliability in him. And when had he grown up, turned into a real man? The next day they went to the cinema, and there, in the dark hall, Mark mustered the courage and kissed Sarah. The girl's head spun, and there was a ringing in her ears. It was so unexpected and pleasant at the same time. Her first kiss. It happened, and she finally felt feminine. It was simply a miracle. "I like you very much," Mark said softly, so as not to disturb others. "Let's date." "Let's," Sarah immediately agreed. Her cheeks were burning, but in the dark it probably wasn't visible, and they officially became a couple. Sarah's life changed greatly from that point on. It acquired dates, flowers, trips to the cinema, circus, and cafes, birthdays of Mark's friends, kisses, walks under the moon. All this lifted her spirits, made her feel special, brought joy, and filled her with energy. Sarah tried not to notice that Mark himself was clearly not the hero of her novel. Although, perhaps Sarah was a little in love with him back then. At the very least, she was grateful to him for showing her what it was like to be special and attractive. And also, Sarah finally calmed down. She had wanted to become a wife and mother so much, from a very young age, when others dreamed of a career or an expensive car. Even in those years, Sarah imagined herself as a mother of many children. But as she grew older, she became seriously worried, so gray, unremarkable, with beauties everywhere. What if no one would want to marry her? What if no one liked her, and she remained alone? And then Mark appeared, so attentive, caring, and in love. Sarah somehow calmed down. The fear of being alone evaporated. Now her dreams finally had a chance to become reality. About a year later, Mark proposed to Sarah. They were walking along the embankment and discussing a movie. Suddenly, the guy blurted out, "Sarah, let's make it official. We have a place to live. I have an apartment. You know, I'm so tired of being alone." Not the most romantic proposal, but Sarah gladly agreed. Mark's words weren't a surprise. Everything had been leading up to it. They had a modest wedding. Sarah's mother quietly wiped away tears. Her mother-in-law smiled stiffly. The father-in-law and the bride's father, engrossed in conversation and a drink, showed no interest. The toastmaster, drunk relatives, silly contests. Everything went according to the parents, as it should. Sarah, however, really wanted this burdensome day to finally end, at home, in Mark's apartment, where they were to live. The bride gratefully pulled off the fluffy, itchy dress and let down her hair, which had been tied in a tight bun. The drunk, tired groom snored loudly. Mark and Sarah's married life began. Both worked, returned home. He lay on the sofa in front of the TV. She hurried to the kitchen to cook dinner. A typical average family. Mark, having become a legal husband, considered his mission accomplished. He no longer invited her to the cinema or for walks, and if he paid compliments, it was only to the latest dish she had cooked. Sarah was basically fine with this. Life at home was exactly the same. Ordinary family life, no better, no worse than others. At least she had a husband, not some old maid. And soon children would come too. Sarah's cherished dream would come true. Everything else wasn't that important. Only, nothing worked out with the children. A year passed since the wedding, then 2, 3. Parents on both sides hinted that they wanted to become grandparents. Sarah would have been happy to fulfill their dream, and most importantly, her own, but it just didn't happen. Mark didn't particularly suffer from the lack of heirs. He was doing well enough. His wife took care of him, fed him, ironed his clothes, cleaned. And if children appeared, where would she find the time? The man didn't bother himself. "It's okay. People live without children," he reassured his wife. But in response to these words, Sarah wanted to hit Mark over the head with something heavy. She had only gotten married to finally become a mother. Her mother-in-law signed Sarah up for a medical center for examination. "Something must be wrong with you." She shook her head. It was hurtful to hear such things. Sarah felt as if Mark's relatives considered her defective. However, her own parents didn't behave much better. "Ah, it seems you inherited your grandmother's genes," her mother lamented. "You know, your father has an aunt, your great-aunt, and she's infertile. You, it seems, take after her." Sarah underwent examination. It turned out she was perfectly fine. "Perhaps the reason is with your husband," the doctor said, spreading his hands. "Well, or incompatibility. That also happens. In any case, your husband needs to undergo an examination." But Mark flatly refused to go to the clinic. "What nonsense! What does this have to do with me?" he exclaimed indignantly. "There have never been any problems with men in our family. I won't go." Sarah pleaded, persuaded, even cried. It was useless. Mark considered visiting a medical center humiliating. His family supported the man. "She probably messed around when she was young, didn't take care of herself, and now she's trying to blame us," his mother-in-law said one day, not hiding her malice. It was so painful and offensive that Sarah couldn't even find anything to say in response. Her relationship with Mark became colder and colder. One could say there was no relationship at all. The spouses barely spoke, living together like neighbors. Therefore, Sarah was hardly surprised and certainly not upset by the news that Mark had someone else. He admitted everything himself, directly, without trying to choose his words. "Sarah, you'll have to move out. You have a week. We're getting a divorce." "What?" The woman didn't understand. "That's right. I have someone else from the institute where I work. She's already pregnant with my child, so we're getting a divorce." "Well, that's news," Sarah gasped. That's the news, Mark agreed. See, I'm normal, and you were dragging me to the hospital. You're the one who can't have children, but I'm fine in that department. We're expecting twins. But you said you didn't want children? Sarah clarified. Didn't want them then, want them now, her almost ex-husband retorted. A man needs heirs, offspring. Sarah returned to her aging parents' house. Where else could she go? The foolish, absurd marriage lasted quite a long time by local standards, almost 10 years. Many of her friends who got married the same year divorced much earlier. Only almost all of them had managed to become mothers, so Sarah envied them. Yes, raising children alone is hard, but it's still much better than living without your own beloved little ones. At that time, Sarah still had hope. She had just turned 35. Her age allowed her to become a mother. But water doesn't flow under a rolling stone. The woman understood that she had to pursue her dream, do something to make it happen. At the very least, she needed a man. After all, a child should have a father. That's where things didn't click. Sarah again felt like a gray mediocrity, a shadow, an invisible person whom the opposite sex didn't notice. By the age of 35, Sarah had put on weight, her hair had become even thinner, and the first barely noticeable wrinkles had appeared. She still hadn't learned to dress stylishly, and nothing sat well on her awkward figure anyway. The charm of youth and freshness was irrevocably gone. Sad. But still, a few more romances happened in Sarah's life, which, however, never ended in anything serious. The woman celebrated her 45th birthday alone. It was a Monday. By that time, her parents were no longer alive. First, her father died of a heart attack, and 2 years later, her mother followed him. The same heart problem. It was, of course, very difficult for Sarah to go through such losses alone. Yes, the woman had friends, but they all had children and families. They couldn't devote all their time to Sarah, and she didn't demand it. She understood perfectly well. On her 45th birthday, on her way home from work, the woman bought an expensive cake from the best bakery and even candles. And now she sat in the semi-dark kitchen, looking at the flickering lights, and thinking about her failed life. The best years were clearly behind her. Time had flown by quickly. Her cherished dream had not come true. She had no children. And now she wouldn't, of course. And no husband either. And generally no close person to lean on in a difficult moment. On the other hand, she was relatively healthy, still young, she had a home, and a job she didn't love very much but which brought a stable income. So maybe she had nothing to complain about. But why then was she so sad, so unbearably gloomy inside? No, Sarah didn't want to sit alone in the kitchen on such a day. She decided to go to the mall, walk around the shops, sit in a cafe, and get distracted. There, in the crowd, it was simply impossible to feel lonely. It was bright, noisy, cheerful, and beautiful there, because the new year was coming soon, and the city had already dressed up for the holiday. Sarah quickly got ready and called a taxi. If she was going out properly. And 10 minutes later, she was at the mall. Music blared from everywhere. People were choosing gifts for the main holiday. Many were with children. Sarah admired such families, happy and not even understanding their own happiness. Here, a young mother irritably scolds her 3-year-old son for whining, and the little one is just tired. But how can she not understand that? And here are very young parents scolding their 6-year-old daughter who is crying and asking for a doll. Oh, if Sarah had a child, she would never scold or reprimand them. After all, everything can be explained calmly. It just takes a little patience and attention. Sarah went to the clothing department. Maybe she would find something interesting? The corporate party was coming up soon. It would be nice to come dressed up. But Sarah only got upset. Whatever she put on, she didn't look at all as she wanted. She had to leave the shopping area without purchases. But at the confectionery shop, the woman spent a considerable sum. She simply couldn't pass by her favorite eclairs and pastries. And she still had cake at home. Yes, Sarah had a sweet tooth. She had to get pleasure from something in life. She knew about the harm of sugar but couldn't help herself. One of her colleagues noticed that Sarah ate when she was stressed. That was probably it. Her whole life was a kind of stress. Sarah couldn't come to terms with her loneliness and unsettled life. Panic seized her at the thought of old age, which she would have to meet in an empty, cold house, and that time was not far off. Sarah sighed and chased away the unpleasant thoughts. She looked at her watch. It was late. The center would close soon. It was time to go back. Tomorrow was a workday. Time to get up early again. The woman went out onto the porch, scanned the parking lot. Could she see a free taxi? She clearly didn't want to trudge to the bus stop in such darkness and bad weather. The frost was getting stronger. The sky was clear and clean with stars shining brightly on it. It would probably be cold again tomorrow. She should hang a bird feeder outside her window. It's hard in such frosts for those who are forced to live on the street. Well, birds, animals, they are used to it. They are. But people, even in their city, there were many homeless people. Sarah often saw them at bus stops or near garbage cans. That's who had it hard. That's who needed to be sad. Not her, who had inherited a warm, cozy home from her parents. Sarah finally spotted a car with a taxi company emblem and hurried towards it. She had to hurry, or someone else would take it. That's when Sarah noticed her. A thin girl in a thin jacket, clearly not for the season, stretched over a huge belly. The girl was standing near the fire exit and trying to warm up. She stamped her feet, rubbed her palms, shrugged her shoulders. She was clearly freezing in her spring jacket. Judging by the size of her belly, the stranger would soon be going to the maternity hospital. And what was she doing outside in such a state? Sarah became curious, so she forgot about the taxi, approached closer, and gasped in horror. Seeing the girl's shoes, light sneakers, dirty and worn. Her feet must have been completely frozen in them. The girl looked lost and scared. Despair was written in her beautiful dark eyes that took up half her face. "What's wrong?" Sarah couldn't help but ask. Her heart ached with pity for this almost still a girl. "Just cold," she replied. "So why don't you go inside? The mall is closing." "They kicked me out." The stranger lowered her eyes. "I'll wait until the security guard turns away and slip back in. I'll hide somewhere and spend the night." "Are you homeless?" "No, I have a home, but I can't go there." "What happened?" Sarah realized she couldn't remain indifferent to this story. She simply had to help this young, beautiful creature. It was impossible to walk past. "It's a long story," the girl waved her hand. She didn't take her eyes off the security guard, and he, as luck would have it, was watching the entrance carefully. Not even a fly could get through. Soon the last visitors would leave, and the man would lock the door. The girl would be left outside. She definitely wouldn't survive the December frosty night. "Come to my place," Sarah blurted out, unexpected even to herself. And then she was immediately frightened by her own words. Invite a complete stranger home? Who knows what's on her mind? But looking again at the lost, shivering, pregnant stranger, the woman understood. Yes, this was the only right decision. The girl needed to be warmed up urgently. The rest could wait. The stranger looked at Sarah with distrust. "Are you serious?" Yes, of course," the woman stated more confidently. "I'll just call a taxi." "Thank you so much." The girl couldn't believe her luck. "I feel awkward imposing on you, but there's no other way. Thank you very much." "You won't impose. I live alone anyway." Sarah smiled, dialing the taxi number. Both were silent on the way. A tense silence hung in the car. But at home, in the warm kitchen, with the cake in the middle of the table, everything became somehow simpler, more natural. "Is it your birthday?" The girl smiled. How sweet she was. So fragile, big-eyed, graceful, and very young. Sarah even doubted if she was 18. That remained to be seen. How did such a defenseless creature end up on the street on a frosty night? Where were her parents? Where was her husband or boyfriend, the father of this child? How could they all allow this girl to be left outside a mall door on a winter night? "My name is Alice," the girl introduced herself, looking around. "It's very cozy here." "And I'm Sarah. I'll make some tea and you can tell me everything, explain what happened to you, and we'll think together how to help you, okay?" "Thank you very much." Alice was clearly touched. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Stay for now." Sarah smiled at her. "Come, I'll show you the room you'll sleep in tonight." The woman took her guest to her parents' bedroom. Almost nothing had changed there since they passed away. A large double bed, a bookshelf with books, a spacious corner wardrobe. "Alice, it should be comfortable and cozy here." "It's a wonderful room," the girl exclaimed happily. Sarah returned to the kitchen and started bustling about. After about 5 minutes, Alice came to her, sat down at the table, and propped her chin on her hands. "I guess it's time to tell my story. You certainly have the right to know. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to me. I don't think I would have survived the night outside." "Yes, they're reporting a strong frost tonight." Sarah shook her head. "Tell me what happened to you, and we'll figure something out together." "That's unlikely." The girl sighed sadly and began her story. Alice was born in a small regional town. She was the eldest daughter in a large family, so from a young age, she looked after her two younger sisters and brother. Her parents were simple and strict. They honored traditions and raised their children the same way. Daughters and sons had to obey their elders without question. Having their own opinion was forbidden. "But I was always different from them," Alice sighed. "I felt like I was in prison there. I wanted to wear bright clothes, listen to loud music, go to discos, but my father forbade all of it, saying that no one would marry a loose girl like that, as if I needed that. I wanted to study. I dreamed of becoming a designer. Her parents had other plans. What designer? Yes, Alice drew well, but you couldn't make much money from it. And so the girl was sent to a culinary technical school to get a practical profession." Sarah sighed. In this, Alice's story echoed her own. After all, Sarah wasn't allowed to fulfill her dream of becoming a teacher either. So she had to work as a cutter in a workshop. And back then, she couldn't disobey her parents. She thought they knew best. And Alice was just the same. When I turned 18, my father married me off. The girl's eyes filled with unspeakable sadness. She lowered her head and sighed heavily. Alice couldn't refuse. The matter had been decided long ago. She became the wife of her father's former colleague, a 40-year-old widower named Frank. Once, during a military campaign, he had saved Alice's father's life, and her father now considered himself indebted to his old friend. "He often stared at me when he came to visit," Alice recalled. "He had such a look, attentive and unpleasant, sticky, somehow. It even gave me goosebumps. But I could never have imagined that this man would become my husband." That's almost a crime," Sarah gasped. "You were only 18 and he was 40. You're a child, he's a grown man. How did your parents agree to this?" "They were even happy," Alice smiled bitterly. "Because we live in a poor town. Half the male population drinks, the other half works from morning till night and earns pennies." "And Frank? He's a former military man. He has a big, sturdy house, an expensive car, and a security business. A most enviable groom by local standards. Only he always scared me. He had a look like a reptile. He would smile, be kind, bring gifts, for me and the younger ones, but I was afraid of him." Of course, the news that she would have to become Frank's wife shocked Alice. She begged her father not to do it and appealed to her mother, but they were adamant. It had to be done. That was final. And so she resigned herself. What else was there? And yet, she was in love with her former classmate Max at the time. And I still am, honestly. It's so hard for me to believe this. Sarah shook her head. In our day, in the 21st century, parents are marrying off their daughter against her will to a grown man. It immediately reminds me of the painting Unequal Marriage. Do you know it? "I do," the girl nodded. Well, that's just how things are arranged there," Alice continued. "What can you do? My opinion didn't interest anyone. There wasn't a wedding as such. Frank didn't want one. We just sat in a restaurant. Parents, the groom and bride, celebrated the event. And then the girl had to go to her legal husband's house. And so, the very young Alice's married life began. It was very difficult for the girl to part with her childhood so suddenly and become Frank's virtual domestic slave. He loved order very much, and it was now the young wife's responsibility to maintain it. If Frank noticed dust or a dirty plate anywhere, punishment followed. First, an hour-long lecture. He would drone on monotonously. A woman must obey her husband. Mess in the house means mess in the head. Cleanliness is the key to health. But the worst part began afterwards. The man would lock Alice in the attic for a whole night. It was cold, dark, and scary there. Scary. "I'm still afraid of the dark," Alice admitted, a little shyly. Of course, there was no bed or mattress in the attic. The girl had to sleep directly on the hard, cold floor. The next morning, Frank would let the offender out and continue to act as if nothing had happened. Alice also wasn't allowed to show her feelings, otherwise there would be punishment again. For minor offenses, the punishment lasted a few hours. For more serious ones, in Frank's opinion, it lasted for days. Of course, Alice was afraid of the adult man. He had scared her before, and now. The girl tried to obey him in everything, but she couldn't always predict what he meant. Sometimes it seemed to Alice that he was deliberately looking for a reason to find fault. Occasionally, Frank would get drunk, alone or with military friends, and then he would completely lose his mind. He would suddenly start seeing things that weren't there, shouting, threatening violence. Not only words were used, the man would grab anything within reach, furniture, dishes, books, and throw them at an invisible enemy. At such moments, Alice would hide in the attic or run out into the yard. Frank would rampage for a few hours, then calm down, go to the bedroom, and fall asleep. Then Alice would crawl out of her hiding place and start cleaning, because if Frank noticed the mess in the morning, he would be furious. Alice didn't want to see her husband in that state at all. "Why didn't you tell your parents about this?" Sarah gasped. "Frank, he's probably not normal. It's dangerous to be near him. He needs treatment." "My parents?" Alice smiled bitterly. "Who would listen to me? Frank is one of the wealthiest and most respected people in our town. And my parents always considered me the most capricious, arrogant. It was useless to talk to them. They would just say again that I think too much of myself." "Well, what if you had called the doctors? During one of his fits, when he talks to someone invisible and throws things. The doctors might have taken him until morning, and then he would have come back to me very angry because I turned him in, you see. I can't even imagine what he would have done to me then. I still don't know exactly what happened to his wife. No one knows." "You said he was a widower?" "Yes, that wife, the first one, was also about 15 years younger than Frank. She wasn't from our town. He brought her from somewhere. She had no friends or relatives here. Quiet, silent, distant. Now I understand why." "I didn't know her very well. I saw her sometimes in the store or on the street, and I wasn't interested in that woman. Why would I be? I was a child back then. Kind of strange. Oh well." One day, returning from school, Alice noticed a crowd of people near Frank's house. And although it wasn't on her way, the girl turned onto the next street. Alice wanted to walk past Frank's gate to find out what was going on there. It turned out to be a funeral. Among the crowd, the girl noticed her own father and mother. She ran up to them and asked, "What happened?" "Frank's wife died," her mother replied, shaking her head sadly. "How? Why? What happened?" Alice couldn't comprehend it. She had seen the woman quite recently. She had looked a little pale, as always anxious, but Frank's wife was young and healthy. What could have happened? "It's none of your business," her father said, pushing his daughter in the back. "Go home now. Don't stand around. Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong." That night, Alice overheard her parents' conversation. Her mother and father were sitting in the kitchen, discussing what had happened. thinking the children were asleep. "And yet I don't understand." Her mother's voice sounded anxious. "How could she fall from the second floor? You'd have to try hard. The railing is high." Frank explained. "She was drunk, and drunk people do all sorts of things." Laura didn't look like an alcoholic. "Looks like it or not. Are you a specialist?" Judging by her father's tone, the conversation was irritating him. "The police conducted an investigation. It was an accident. But I still think it wasn't. Either Frank pushed her, or she did it herself because of such a life. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Many people say the neighbors heard arguing and shouting before." "When you think something, you should cross yourself," her father almost shouted. "Don't talk nonsense. Stupid housewives are clucking, and you're happy to pick it up. Specialists conducted the investigation. It was an accident, period." Various rumors circulated in the town for a long time. Many didn't believe that Frank's wife had accidentally fallen down the stairs. Only, time passed. The story lost its edge. Alice feared her father's friend even more after that. And of course the news that she was to become his wife shocked the girl. But the girl understood that there was nowhere to go. You couldn't go against your parents' will. "How could this be?" Sarah exclaimed, throwing up her hands. "I don't understand your parents at all. If they knew what kind of person he was, if they even entertained the thought that he did something to his wife, how could they even think of marrying you off to him?" "But I told you, he's an enviable groom," Alice said. "Becoming related to someone like him is like winning the lottery. All doors are now open to my family in town. As for me, well, my parents have other daughters and a son." There was so much bitterness, so much pain in these words. Sarah couldn't help herself. She hugged the fragile girl tightly. Alice immediately softened and relaxed in her arms, as if that was all she had been waiting for. Then she pulled away and continued her story. "About 6 months after the wedding, I realized I was pregnant. I was scared. I didn't want it. Frank had always dreamed of an heir, but I didn't want a child from that terrible man, because in our house, which was simply a prison, there would be another prisoner. It's one thing for me. I'm an adult, after all. But a defenseless baby in the hands of that monster. Just imagine what he could do to him." Alice hid her condition for as long as she could, but the perceptive Frank noticed the changes. "He guessed everything," Alice sighed. "He was happy. He took me to a jewelry store so I could choose whatever I wanted there. He hadn't been stingy before, despite his behavior, but now he showered me with gifts. And Frank himself took me to an expensive medical center where I registered for pregnancy care. But all these gifts and care didn't make Alice happy at all. On the contrary, she was scared, very scared, and also disgusted and uncomfortable. Frank hugged her in public, said he was happy, and often confessed his love. But Alice remembered perfectly well how he locked her in the attic, called her names, and humiliated her. True, he never laid a hand on her. He wanted to sometimes, even very much. The girl saw it in the furious glint in his eyes, but he restrained himself with an incredible effort of will. Only Alice knew that someday he would snap. She knew it. She was 100% sure. And who knows, maybe then the fate of Frank's first wife awaited her. Everyone would say later that she fell down the stairs or tripped and hit her head. Time passed. Her belly grew. Alice already knew she was carrying a girl. Frank had hoped for a son, so the news of a daughter disappointed him a little. But Alice, on the contrary, was happy, because what if a son turned out to be like his father? How could she love him then? How could she raise him? But a girl, she would most likely resemble her mother. Frank restrained himself with all his might, scolded and insulted his young wife, but no longer allowed himself to lock her in the attic. He said that as soon as she gave birth, she would get what she deserved in full. But for now, she needed to be protected. These words frightened Alice. "I guess I resigned myself to such a life," the girl admitted. "I adapted somehow." She realized that, in principle, if she played by Frank's rules, she could live. In our town, many husbands beat their wives. It's almost normal. But Frank never hit me once. And I had everything I wanted. I just had to ask. The other thing was that in such conditions, she didn't particularly want anything. Alice resigned herself to fate, prepared to become a caring mother, and tried to be a good wife to Frank. It seemed to her that her entire life was predetermined. Only one day the girl accidentally overheard her husband's conversation with his mistress. The fact that Frank allowed himself affairs while having a wife was not news to Alice. Yes, the man didn't hide it. He sometimes came home in the morning, drunk, tired, smelling of women's perfume. He would collapse onto the bed, and a minute later, his snoring would be heard. It never occurred to Alice to reprimand him or ask unnecessary questions. All the better, less attention for her. What jealousy? What worries? Let him do what he wants. It happened at night. For some reason, Alice's stomach hurt then, so the girl couldn't fall asleep. She lay in bed, stroking her tense belly, trying to relieve the spasm. Frank was in his study, seemingly working, sitting over papers. Alice never delved into her husband's affairs. And then suddenly, the phone rang. The girl listened intently. It was 2 a.m. People didn't call at such a time for no reason. She wondered what had happened. Her husband's voice sounded surprisingly soft, even tender. Alice had never heard it before. He called the person on the other end endearing names. My love, my beauty, Alyanushka. It was so unusual that Alice even forgot about the pain in her stomach. Well, who knew Frank could be like that? I missed you very much, Frank confessed. The other person. Of course I miss you too, but you know I have a lot of work now, and I also have to keep an eye on my wife. She's a silly, naive girl carrying my child. She might do something wrong, harm the baby. Yes, I agree. It's unfair, but that's how it turned out. Alice was angered by the way Frank was talking about her. A silly girl doesn't understand anything will harm the baby, as if she were completely stupid. The man, meanwhile, continued the conversation. Yes, as soon as she gives birth, you and I will be together. We'll take the child from her, and she can go wherever she wants. Yes, I promise. Fear overwhelmed Alice. Did she imagine it? Or was Frank really planning to do something terrible? The girl only heard her husband's side of the conversation, but even from that, a lot was clear. Well, of course it's a pity you can't have children. A child is a priceless gift from a beloved woman, but you'll be a wonderful mother to my girl, better than young Alice, who doesn't understand anything about life yet. Problem? But what problems could there be with her? You know I have connections everywhere. Everything will go smoothly. Alice can have more children later. She's young and healthy. What difference does it make to her? Alice's mind raced. The puzzle was coming together, and the picture was anything but happy. It turned out Frank had a mistress, some Alyanushka. It seemed he had strong feelings for her. One would think, why didn't he marry the lady of his heart then? Why marry a naive, silly girl who knew nothing about life? Apparently, it was all because this very Alyanushka couldn't bear her man a child. That happens. But the couple definitely needed an heir. So Frank married young Alice to use her as an incubator, and then cast her aside. And why not? He was the local king and god. He could do whatever he wanted. He would send her back to her parents, and they would still blame their unfortunate daughter for not being a good wife. And her child, her little daughter, would be raised by a complete stranger, this very Elena. The little one stirred gently in Alice's belly at that moment. A wave of tenderness flooded the future mother's heart. No, she would never, ever give this child away to anyone. Alice already loved her little one and had no intention of parting with her. But Frank, he was so strong and influential in this town. He had everything covered. Alice wouldn't dare to utter a sound. She would be accused of failing in her parental duties. Or maybe she would suddenly be diagnosed with some illness. Or maybe the police would find some substances in Alice's purse. Nothing could be ruled out. Frank's arms were long. He was one of the masters of their small town. Well, if she couldn't escape her influential husband in town, there was only one thing left: to run away as far as possible. True, a number of serious questions immediately arose for Alice: where to run, where and how to live, how to explain her disappearance. She was due to give birth in a couple of months. By then, she needed to settle in a new place. Wandering the world alone was one thing, but with a newborn baby in her arms. But staying with Frank was dangerous. He was a terrible man. As long as Alice was carrying his child, maybe he wouldn't touch her. But what would happen later, when Frank wanted to take the baby and Alice started to resist? The girl wasn't going to find out. The very next morning, Alice gathered all the jewelry her husband had given her and took it to a pawn shop. They paid her enough money. It would last for several months of well-fed life in a strange city. But then, she would still need some source of income, and Alice probably wouldn't be able to work with a baby in her arms. The girl decided she would deal with problems as they arose. For now, she had money. They would see later. Alice packed her things into a travel bag. She also added a few items she had managed to buy for her daughter. She didn't want anything belonging to her child to remain in that house. She dressed inappropriately for the weather. Her winter clothes were left hanging in the hallway. Otherwise, Frank, coming home, would immediately notice their absence and start asking where his wife had gone without permission. That way, Alice gained extra time. Who knew? Maybe these would be crucial hours or even minutes. The girl put on an autumn jacket and sneakers, reasoning that nothing terrible would happen. After all, she would be traveling by taxi. She wouldn't freeze. Frank had gone about his business. He was often not home during the day. Alice decided to take advantage of her husband's absence, called a taxi, and went to the bus station. There she boarded the first bus she saw, which brought her to the city where Sarah lived. Fate. At the station, I realized I'd been robbed. The girl continued her story. Most likely it happened when I was getting on the bus. There was a crowd of people back in my town near the entrance. At one point, there was a crush. That's when someone took my wallet from my bag. And Alice was left with nothing, without money and without support in a strange, unfamiliar city. And she was dressed in a light jacket and sneakers, clothes completely unsuitable for the unusually frosty December. A desperate situation, to say the least. I went to the nearest mall, Alice said. At least it was warm there. I had some change left in my pocket, enough for lunch. But what to do next, I didn't even know. I only knew one thing. I definitely couldn't go back home, because Frank, he had clearly noticed my absence by now and was furious. I didn't even want to think about what he might do to me. So you only arrived here today? Sarah clarified. Yes, this afternoon. I was incredibly lucky that you took me in. Let's switch to you, informal. Sarah smiled at her guest. I'm more used to it that way. Okay, Alice agreed, a little shyly. He'll look for you, of course, but I don't think Frank will immediately realize I'm not in town. Now he'll start grilling all my relatives and friends. By the time he figures it out, enough time will have passed, and I'll have already left here for a place where he won't find any trace of me. But I don't know how. Listen, what if he goes to the police? You'll be put on a wanted list, and I think they'll find you very quickly. He won't. I left him a note asking him not to look for me, and I put the same note under my parents' door. I explained that I left on my own and don't want to be searched for, but he will, of course. He will look for me. He doesn't need me. But the child... Alice gently stroked her belly at these words. Sarah, despite the tense situation, couldn't help but smile. This girl would be a very good and caring mother. You could see it right away. But what to do with Alice? How to help her? Here's what, Sarah said. Stay with me for now. If anyone asks, I'll explain that you're a distant relative from the village. But it's unlikely anyone will be curious. We don't interact much with the neighbors here. So live here and don't worry about anything for now, at least until summer, and then we'll see. Maybe something will become clear. Really? A bright smile illuminated Alice's face. The girl became even more charming. Her eyes shone, and cute dimples appeared on her cheeks. Of course, Sarah nodded. Where else would you go in your condition? Going to the police, as I understand it, is not an option. There seems to be no crime committed. All that's left is to keep hiding. Frank won't think of looking for you at a complete stranger's house. I don't even know what to say. No words are enough to express my gratitude. If it weren't for you, my child and I probably wouldn't be here. We would have just frozen somewhere under a fence. Everything will be all right, Sarah smiled. It was nice to feel like a savior. And now Sarah wasn't lonely. There was a person in the house who needed her attention and care. And soon, a little one would be born. That was true happiness. The days flowed one after another. Sarah continued to go to the factory, while Alice stayed at home. She didn't sit idle. She cleaned, cooked, and sewed diapers for the baby on Sarah's sewing machine. Sarah herself now returned home in a completely different mood. She always bought something tasty on the way to please Alice. The girl needed positive emotions after everything she had been through, and now Sarah's refrigerator was always stocked with fruits and vegetables. Pregnant women need vitamins. In the evenings, Sarah and Alice watched television or talked about various topics. The young girl turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist with a wonderful, easygoing nature. She told Sarah everything that was on her mind, sharing her most intimate secrets. "I've never been so open, even with my mom," Alice admitted. "But you understand me and support me in everything." Sarah was pleased by these words. She truly felt almost like this girl's mother. And why not? By age, she could certainly be her daughter. And the woman sincerely didn't understand how Alice's parents could treat her like that. Why did the girl have to seek support and shelter in a strange city, and not from her own family? Didn't her mother and father understand what a joy it was to have such a sweet, kind daughter? One day, Alice told Sarah about Max, a boy from her class with whom she had a romance back in school. "He's wonderful, very good. He courted me so beautifully." Alice's eyes lit up with genuine joy at the mention of the young man's name. It was clear that the girl still had feelings for him. Can you imagine Max, even while still in school, went to work part-time at a car repair shop to earn money for movies, cafes, flowers, gifts for me. He was ready to do anything for me. Alice also loved the handsome classmate. They spent a lot of time together. They even made plans for the future. Then Max went into the army, and when he returned, Alice was already married. Max was upset then, angry at the girl, but later he understood what was what. He would visit Alice when Frank wasn't home, urging her to run away. "I wanted to do it so much," Alice recalled. "Run away with Max far, far away, where no one would find us. But then I realized I couldn't. Frank, he would definitely find us. Max wouldn't be able to get an official job because Frank would find out about it immediately. He has connections everywhere. I don't even know what Frank would have done to him, to both of us. I didn't want to ruin Max's life. He didn't deserve it, and so I had to refuse." "What a sad and romantic story," Sarah sighed. "Well, it turns out things like this happen not just in movies. And what about Max?" "Max. He was hurt then. He decided I preferred an old, rich husband and a comfortable life, that I betrayed our feelings. It was so painful, so obedno, but I didn't try to convince Max otherwise. It's even better for him to think that way. Otherwise, he would have tried to save me. And that would have ended very badly for him." A month flew by unnoticed. The due date was approaching. Everything in Sarah's house was ready for the baby's arrival. The woman eagerly awaited the joyful moment. Would a child finally appear within these walls? It was simply incredible. Her father's study was decided to be converted into a nursery. A crib, which Sarah had bought for a pittance from an ad, was placed near the wall. The woman sewed the bedding herself from wonderful soft pink fabric and even cut out a light canopy. It turned out to be a beautiful crib for a little princess. The woman often admired the work of her hands and imagined the joyful moment when Alice would lay the tiny girl here. Alice couldn't give birth in the hospital. Frank had surely already put out a description, and as soon as his wife appeared in a maternity ward, he would immediately know about it. Sarah arranged with an experienced midwife that as soon as the time came, she would come at her call and deliver the baby. After all, Alice's pregnancy was going well. Home births had become very popular recently, so there was nothing special about doing without a maternity hospital. Alice was immensely grateful to Sarah for such care. The girl assured her that as soon as she had the opportunity, she would definitely do something in return for the kind woman. Sarah just smiled. Alice couldn't imagine how much she was already doing, simply by trusting her so much and brightening her lonely sadness. Next to Alice, Sarah felt needed, useful, and strong. One day, Sarah returned from work early. The electricity at the factory had been cut off, and the management sent everyone home. On the way, the woman stopped at a store to buy groceries and also picked up Alice's favorite fruit curd. Let the girl be happy. Sarah opened the door with her key and quietly entered the hallway. What if Alice was sleeping? Lately, that happened often. It was understandable. Her body was gaining strength before childbirth and sleepless nights. The house was quiet. And then Alice's voice came from behind the closed bedroom door. She was talking to someone on the phone, and the girl's voice sounded harsh, firm, even commanding. She had never spoken in such a sharp manner. Sarah involuntarily froze and listened. "You want to get your child? Prepare the money," Alice instructed the person on the other end. "What you've already paid isn't enough. If I don't have the required amount within 3 days, I'll fall from a windowsill somewhere on a railing, and that's it. You won't prove anything. I accidentally slipped. My belly outweighed me." Sarah shrank back near the door. What was happening? Did these words really belong to the sweet, quiet Alice? She wondered who she was demanding money from. Frank? But it was his child. And according to Alice, Frank was so all-powerful that calling him was dangerous. He would track down where his wife had gone. Alice was very afraid of her husband and would hardly dare to talk to him. Then what? "Think faster," Alice continued. "If you throw me another pittance hoping to drag it out until the birth, I'll give birth. What else can I do? But I'll leave the baby at an orphanage. You won't even know which city it happens in. Can you imagine how many abandoned babies appear in such institutions? You'll wear yourselves out looking for your daughter, and you won't have much time because healthy newborn babies are quickly adopted." This image of the new Alice didn't fit at all with the modest, quiet girl Sarah had taken in. This Alice was tough, audacious. She masterfully manipulated the person on the other end, dictated terms, and most importantly, threatened. Alice hung up and dialed someone else. This time her voice sounded completely different, friendly, even tender. Sarah caught every word. She had to understand whom she had sheltered. "Yes, Max, I called them. No, I'm sure. Yes, you're right. I know how to talk to them. That's exactly how I talked. If they really want to see their daughter alive, they'll bring the money to the agreed place. And you watch the spot, okay? Just be careful and cautious. They might involve the police. Although it's unlikely, of course, after I scared them like that. Yes, I'm fine. No, this simpleton doesn't suspect anything. Everything's easy with her. She takes care of me, feeds me treats. Can you imagine? You were right. She's a sucker. I feel good. Yes, Sarah tiptoed to the front door. The conversation was clearly coming to an end. The woman didn't want Alice to guess she had been eavesdropping. Sarah was simply afraid of her reaction, and she didn't yet understand what to do or how to handle this situation. The woman went out into the yard and headed for the gazebo her father had built years ago. The family used to spend wonderful evenings there. Her mother would make tea and her father would grill kebabs. It was good. And now, Sarah sat in the cozy gazebo, trying to comprehend what she had heard. So, Alice was not at all who she pretended to be. She didn't seem like a timid, quiet victim. On the contrary, this girl was demanding money from people. And how skillfully Alice had told her stories all this time. You could listen forever. Simply a talented actress. Sarah opened her heart to her. Oh, she really was a simpleton, and Alice had an accomplice, Max. So, Max did exist after all. Perhaps that was the only truth her guest had told her. Everything else was under serious question. But why was Alice willing to sacrifice the child if she didn't get the money? Maybe she was just lying? Why would someone be willing to pay for this baby? Maybe this Frank wasn't a tyrant at all, but a victim. Sarah knew only one thing. She couldn't let Alice know her awareness. It seemed this girl was a real monster, wearing the role of a poor sheep. She was so easy to believe, defenseless, fragile, young, and pregnant too. But Sarah couldn't stay in the same house overnight with Alice either. On the spot, the woman invented a story about a business trip, supposedly assigned to her by the factory. That had never happened, but how would Alice know? She had been living with her for just over a month. She was unlikely to suspect anything. Sarah called a friend and asked if she could spend the night. She said she had fumigated the house for cockroaches and couldn't stay there for now, so one problem solved. All that remained was to warn Alice, and in such a way that she would believe it implicitly. A business trip? Great. Alice smiled, listening to Sarah. It must be very interesting. When I put my daughter in kindergarten, I'll definitely get a job too. I can't wait. You'll have time, Sarah smiled. The woman tried her best to seem natural. By evening, Sarah had made up her mind. Of course, she first needed to go to the police. The eldest son of her colleague, Owen, worked there. Sarah had known him since childhood. He definitely wouldn't refuse her. Saying goodbye to Alice, they even hugged at the front door. Sarah went straight to the nearest police station. On the way, she called Owen and explained that she needed to see him. So the young man met the woman on the porch. "Hello, Aunt Sarah," Owen said happily. "Come in, I'll show you my office." Sarah smiled. This young man was calling her aunt. Yes, perhaps she really was very grown up now. How hard it was to get used to it. In the office, sitting on a hard plastic chair, Sarah told Owen everything. He listened attentively, without interrupting. In his police uniform and with a serious expression, he looked unusually grown up. After Sarah finished, Owen asked if she had a photo of the girl. "Yes," she replied immediately. "We took pictures when we celebrated New Year." The woman took out her phone, scrolled through the gallery, and stopped at the right photo. It was a selfie. In it, Sarah and Alice were sitting arm in arm in front of a set table, smiling at the camera. "Her face looks familiar, by the way," Owen mused. "Let me transfer the photo to my computer and run it through the database. Then I'll contact you, okay?" "Okay, thank you very much." "You're welcome for now," Owen said, spreading his hands. With a sense of duty fulfilled, Sarah went to her friend, who was already waiting for her. Well, she had done everything she could. Now, whatever happens, happens. She had 2 days of a supposed business trip. Maybe something would become clear during that time. Everything became clear much earlier. Owen called Sarah the very next day after lunch. "Well, Aunt Sarah, we got your—" Sarah couldn't believe her ears. "Alice, you mean?" "She's not Alice, she's Diane. Come to the station after work. I'll tell you everything." "Thanks to you, I now have a major solved case to my credit. So thank you." "You're welcome," Sarah replied automatically and hung up. The woman couldn't wait until the end of the workday, so she went to the workshop manager and asked for time off. It was fine. She didn't do it that often. To find out the truth as quickly as possible, Sarah called a taxi. It would take too long by bus. Owen met Sarah on the porch again. His eyes shone with joy, a smile didn't leave his face, and a healthy blush colored his cheeks. Sarah found herself in Owen's office again. He didn't drag it out. He started telling the story immediately. As he narrated, Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She had expected anything but this. Alice turned out to be Diane. She was indeed born in a small town, in a large family, and had always dreamed of getting rich. Just like her friend Max. Together, the young people came up with this plan. In their town lived an influential, wealthy businessman who was indeed named Frank. But he didn't think of marrying Diane. He already had a wife. Their marriage was almost 20 years old, and everything in the family was wonderful. Except for one thing. Frank's wife, Brenda, couldn't have children. The man spared no expense, sending his beloved to expensive clinics, even calling doctors from abroad. Brenda underwent many procedures and IVF, but nothing helped. The desired pregnancy never occurred. Diane knew about this story because she worked part-time as an orderly at the local family and reproduction center. She had seen Brenda and Frank many times and was aware of their situation. At the right moment, she simply approached the inconsolable Brenda and offered her services. "I can carry a child for you," the girl said. "I accidentally overheard your situation. I feel so sorry for you. And I really need money, think about it. I'm young, healthy, strong. I can carry a wonderful baby, and your dream will come true." Brenda looked at the girl with distrust, but still took her phone number and said she would call back. "Yes, of course," she called back. The unhappy woman was ready for anything just to become a mother. Brenda understood that she couldn't carry a child herself, so what was wrong with another woman doing it? What difference did it make how her child came into the world? The main thing was that there would be one at all. Frank supported his wife in this decision. And so Diane was implanted with the embryo of Frank and Brenda's future baby. The child took hold and began to grow and develop. Diane was initially an ideal surrogate mother. She took vitamins, visited doctors, followed prescriptions, and then she disappeared. She unexpectedly vanished from the town, leaving Brenda and Frank completely in the dark. They were already imagining themselves as parents and had prepared the nursery. And then this. Brenda cried all day, and Frank tried to find the runaway. No one understood what had happened, but soon everything became clear. It turned out the surrogate mother's disappearance was part of a plan carefully thought out by Max and Diane. Diane had never intended to simply give birth to the child and hand it over to the happy parents. They had promised a sum that would be enough to buy a large apartment. But Diane and Max dreamed of more and intended to extort a fortune from Frank. The couple planned to go to Thailand after the deal, buy a small apartment there, and live as they pleased. Diane needed to hide. The couple didn't have money for long-term housing rental, but Max knew that Sarah, a lonely, trusting woman who was easy to deceive, lived in the neighboring city. He had accidentally learned about her from an acquaintance. It would be good to stay with her for a while. No one would look for her there. Everything went smoothly. Diane pretended to be a poor, unfortunate girl in a desperate situation in the parking lot. Sarah, of course, fell for it and invited her home. "But wait," Sarah interrupted Owen. "Please explain how Max knew about me anyway." "Some acquaintance of his works at your factory," Owen explained. "He happened to mention in conversation that they have such a woman there, Sarah." When Max told him that his girlfriend planned to become a surrogate mother, it just came up. This acquaintance mentioned that you also dream of a child and so on. And Max, he's a cunning fox. He latched onto that information and sniffed everything out. Well, they watched you for a few days and staged this supposedly accidental meeting. "I'm sorry, Aunt Sarah, but you really acted foolishly." "I know." The woman didn't argue. That was true. Diane called Frank on the phone. He left large sums at agreed-upon places in their town. Max picked up the envelopes. The couple had accumulated a fortune in their account, but it wasn't enough for them. Greed ruined them. And chance helped. You returned from work early and overheard the conversation. Well, the rest is clear. You probably left me the photo. I ran it through the database and found a match. Frank did go to the police after all, professionally but cautiously, without unnecessary fuss. Because if Diane had seen her pictures in the newspapers, who knows what she would have done to the child. "Yes," Sarah sighed. "And now what?" "Now everything is fine. Diane is where she needs to be, under police supervision, and right now she's giving birth in the prison infirmary, so the child will be born any minute. Diane won't have time to do anything to him. Then the baby will be given to the parents. That's the little one's fate. Hasn't even been born yet, and already been through so much." Giving birth right now? Sarah became anxious. There was a crib in her room for this little one. The woman was not indifferent to the baby's fate. Can I somehow find out if the baby is okay?" "Of course, Aunt Sarah, I'll call you back. Don't worry, go home. Only, we made an arrest there. Your place is probably a mess. The guys tracked dirt in." "It's okay." The house greeted the woman with silence. Sarah had gotten used to having the smiling, talkative Alice, or rather Diane, living there. And now she was alone again. There would be no more shared dinners and conversations over tea. A warm infant wouldn't be placed in the crib prepared with love. Yes, Alice Diane had managed to inflict an emotional wound on the woman who had foolishly and naively sheltered her, and Frank and Brenda. Sarah couldn't even imagine what the parents, who had dreamed of a child so much and almost lost him, must have felt. But for them, everything would be fine now. Their daughter was about to be born, and thanks to her, Sarah, the girl would end up in the safe hands of her own mom and dad, not in the power of criminals for whom the baby was just a thing. So, it wasn't in vain. Sarah sighed, filled a bucket with water, and started washing the floors. The police officers had indeed tracked dirt in on their boots from the street. Sarah approached Annie and picked her up. The girl was growing quickly and had become quite heavy, but it was a very pleasant weight. The little one wrapped her small arms around Sarah's neck and kissed the woman on the cheek. At that moment, there was no happier person in the world than Sarah. She knew that the girl sincerely loved her and missed her nanny when she took a day off. Sarah herself missed the girl very much. She tried not to leave the house unnecessarily, but sometimes urgent matters arose. "I dreamed of the mean aunt again," Annie whispered confidentially right into Sarah's ear. "She wanted to take me away." "That was just a dream," the woman smiled, tucking a fallen strand of light hair behind the girl's ear. "I know, but that aunt often appears in my dreams. She's beautiful, but mean." Sarah sighed. Annie simply couldn't know about what happened to her shortly before birth. It was impossible. It didn't happen that way. But why did she repeatedly dream of a mean, beautiful aunt who, by description, resembled Diane? Sarah discussed this issue with Brenda, the girl's mother. The women didn't know what to think. Could the little one have somehow perceived and remembered something while in the surrogate mother's womb? Sarah had become very close friends with Brenda. They were the same age and shared similar views. And the women understood each other well. After all, both had the same dream of motherhood and the same pain. Brenda had managed to become a mother, while Sarah was now the baby's godmother and her nanny part-time, because Brenda and Frank worked a lot, and the girl needed looking after. After everything that had happened, the couple were afraid to hire someone off the street. They didn't want to let just anyone near the child. The parents already had a sad experience and didn't want to go through something similar again. The idea to get to know the woman who saved Annie better came from Frank himself. He reasoned that Sarah was a very kind, responsible person, since she had sheltered the pregnant Diane. True, she was naive, but that was better than cunning and deceit. Frank and Brenda came to Sarah one evening. About 2 weeks had passed since Diane's arrest. The sleeping baby was with them. Sarah couldn't take her eyes off the girl for a long time, watching, smiling, happy that she was in the hands of loving parents. The couple thanked Sarah for helping to expose Diane and Max. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would be happening to our Annie. To us, right now," Brenda said with a trembling voice. Tears appeared in her beautiful turquoise eyes. It was clear the woman hadn't fully recovered from the situation yet. "But what are you saying? What did I do?" Sarah said shyly. "And anyway, it was a coincidence that I came home on time." "It was just a fortunate turn of events, which means it was fate. We have a business proposal for you," Frank announced. "We are looking for a nanny for the little one, and you are the person we can trust. How does that sound?" Sarah was speechless for a moment. A wave of joy washed over her. In those few minutes, she had already grown attached to Annie and had come to love these polite, kind people. And then such an offer. There was nothing to think about. Of course, she agreed. And so 3 years passed. Sarah lived in the guest house at Frank and Brenda's place and happily looked after Annie. Finally, her dream had come true. In a peculiar way, of course, but still. Sarah didn't become a teacher or a mother as she had wanted, but she had the most beloved girl to care for and reliable, understanding friends, Frank and Brenda, close people. Now Sarah was not alone. The woman carried Annie into the house, sat her down at the table, and placed a bowl of oatmeal with fruit in front of the girl. "Well, a story?" Sarah asked. "Yes, a story." The little one clapped her hands happily. "About a princess who was taken by a wicked witch, but then everything turned out well." "Okay," Sarah smiled. "Listen, but don't forget to eat." Annie nodded and diligently started eating. Sarah couldn't help but smile again. She was truly happy.